there's been a lot happening lately. On October 7, the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas carried out a surprise attack against Israel, which killed over 1,200 Israeli civilians. And then we've had the Israeli retaliation and the invasion of Gaza. On the north, Hezbollah has been shelling Israeli cities on the border on daily basis, which resulted in the displacement of approximately 100,000 Israelis. And then we have the Houthis' disruption of global trade and attacking commercial vessels in the waters. Shia militia attacking US forces in Iraq and Syria. And most importantly, the Islamic Republic's nuclear escalation. I am Farhad Rezaei, Senior Fellow at the Philos Project, and today with Behnam bin Taleblu, a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, we would like to discuss these important issues, and we will try to find out what are the best ways to counter the threats from the Islamic Republic. Behnam, thank you very much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Farhad. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you and your viewers.
Thank you very much. Behnam, I would like to start with Hamas October 7 attack, and I would like to have your take on that.
I'd also love, your view on that as well, because it's such a media war here in the United States. There was 2 Wall Street Journal stories saying, Iran was involved, and then there was a Reuters story saying Iran was not involved. And it continues to be a situation where you stand in life depends on where you sit and the sources you have and the views you have. So, October 7, we know the crisis didn't begin on October 7. There's much more of a backdrop. But I found that both the reporting is missing something. The ones who say, Iran is intimately involved, and the others who say Iran was super surprised. I think Iran means what it says when it says death to Israel, death to America. This is a regime which has taken time, money away from the Iranian national interest and the public good and put it towards these types of adventures that include the export of the revolution and the material support for the axis of the resistance, which is a phrase that the regime themselves uses for all of these proxies, and Hamas certainly is one of them. They have different relationships with these groups, but just because Iran doesn't have a direct tie of, when I say jump, you say how high to some of these groups, or just because some of these groups existed first and then the Islamic Republic co-opted them, doesn't mean that today in 2023 and 2024 that they are not proxies, because the groups that Iran created, we know, Hezbollah in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Badr Corps in Iraq, and all the other militias there. But then there's groups that Iran co-opted, like the Houthis in Yemen or Hamas in Gaza. And here, the continued provision of material support is what wins them over. Hamas and Iran even had drama over the fate of Assad. And the fact that Iran was able to win Hamas back with money and weapons and material support and training goes to show you how elastic these relationships are. So obviously, I think Iran understands that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to a different extent, are shooting at the people that the Islamic Republic wants to shoot at, which is, Israel. But Iran has this proxy strategy of fighting to the last Arab, and it spent time and money and effort of fighting to the last Arab. And it's precisely why you had the endorsement of what happened even after by Khamenei. And it's why Iran's proxy network, again, which they themselves call the axis of resistance, has come online. So this debate that has existed for over 100 days, where I'm sitting in Washington, is in some way born of a misunderstanding of the patron proxy relationship. And they're looking for a smoking gun, a go order, an intercepted phone call from Khamenei or an intercepted phone call from Ismail Haniyeh saying yes, green light from Tehran. But that's not the way this entire network works.
Exactly.
And I think that's what's missing from the story.
That's exactly. I totally agree with you. As you just mentioned, the Islamic Republic funds them, provides them with weapon material, and trains them. And these are for a purpose, right? We know that this is the strategy of the Islamic Republic for it's called the Ring of Fire strategy, and that's for a purpose to encircle Israel, to use these proxy networks to harass Israel, to attack Israel. So you mentioned that there are some people who say that well, although Iran supports them, funds them, trained them, but it was not aware that Hamas is going to initiate this surprise attack against Israel. Well, this is sort of questionable, but I would say that, I mean, I'm trying to be very optimist that even if Iran was unaware, I would say that Iran was unaware that Hamas would be able to carry out such a spectacular attack against Israel. Otherwise, I don't see Iran should be kept in the dark, right? Maybe they were not aware that Hamas is really able, or Israel would be surprised. I mean, this is something that we can say that, okay, Iranians were not aware to this extent, but the fact that Iran wasn't aware that Hamas is going to attack Israel right at this time, I think this is really too optimistic.
Do you also say then that Hamas itself was surprised as to how far they were able to penetrate and the extent of the damage they could cause?
Well, I would say that probably everyone was surprised, even the observers, because it was this notion that the Israeli army, the Israeli intelligence are among the best in the world. It is almost impossible for the Islamic Republic and its proxies to carry out such a big and a spectacular attack against Israel. So that is my understanding, that probably everyone was surprised, including Israel military and intelligence. But again, to me, this is really naive to think that Iran was unaware that Hamas is going to attack Israel. There was no coordination, not to mention that I think few weeks prior to the attack, there were several meetings between the Quds Force officials, including the chief of the Quds Force, Ismail Qa'ani, and Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, and some of the members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Lebanon. So those meetings were for coordinating the attack. There were some other evidences, but again, to me, it's just like really naive to think that Iran was not aware or it was not involved. I mean, the term involvement is just like meaningless. Iran is training them, providing them with weapons, funding them, and that's for a reason, right?
Exactly. It's to say you're getting all the ingredients ready in the kitchen, but you're going to go to the bathroom instead.
Yeah,
it doesn't compute with logic.
Exactly. Okay, so and then also we have the Hezbollah shelling of Israeli cities on the border. I would like to hear your opinion about that. I wrote an article with the Time of Israel. I was, speculating that whether Hezbollah would get involved in the conflict or not. And in that piece, I said, well, it's sort of, impossible for Hezbollah for a number of reasons. And one reason was that Hezbollah is there to act as a deterrence against a potential military attack by the United States and Israel against Iran's nuclear program. So for that reason, I don't think Hezbollah would get involved. I would like to hear from you, Behnam, that if Hezbollah is not going to involve, then why they constantly keep shelling Israel? What's exactly the message that the Islamic Republic and Hezbollah is going to convey to Israel and the United States?
Well, I think Hezbollah is probably, a lot of people call it the most successful proxy or the most successful instance of the export of even the model of the Islamic Revolution. In terms of the ideology, it's 1-to-1. In terms of the sect, it's 1-to-1. In terms of being what people saw in Iran at the beginning of the revolution, which is the armed militias supporting clerical political power. The comites supporting the clerics, and then you get the fusion of religion and state that you have in Iran today, brought to you by that armed power. That's essentially what Hezbollah has been doing since the Lebanese civil war, up until when they control more than half of that state today. And what we saw from Hezbollah was interesting, because I precisely agree with you. I agreed with you in 2023 and in 2024 that this is not the purpose of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not created to bail out Hamas. Different groups, both obviously still contesting Israel, but different groups with different local actor interests.
Exactly.
Hezbollah has tried more and more. The more it's been involved, the more overtly it's been seen in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, even reports of training Iranian proxies, the more it has had to fight harder and harder to look more Lebanese, when in reality it's looking more and more like an Iranian military force than ever before. And here the goal is, yes, it's to support Iran's, the Islamic Republic of Iran, we should say, adventurous ideology in the region, but without risking it all in their home base, which is in Lebanon. And there's a careful deterrence that every single day is being rewritten. Sometimes the Israelis talk about the rules of the game when they talk about how they fight these different proxies. I think the rules of the game are changing every single day between Israel and Hezbollah, because yes, Hezbollah has not gotten as directly involved, but it is still supporting its Arab brethren in Gaza by trying to distract or draw away political interest and attention and even resources and manpower from the IDF from the south to the north. We already know there's over 100,000 internally displaced people in the north of Israel. They can't go back home if there's a war raging on. The Israelis need to do something to pacify it. So my real fear is that even though Hezbollah, out of all the proxies, when you look at even the Shia militias in Iraq, at least 3 or 4 times now have tried to fire drones and cruise missiles, all intercepted, but towards Israel. The Shia militias in Iraq and Syria have fired over 120 times, I think, at U.S. forces in the region. The Houthis in Yemen have become activated, targeting shipping. All of these different actors play a different role. But if you ask me which theater has the greatest prospect for inadvertent escalation to bring the patron, Iran, in directly, it is Hezbollah. And that's because Hezbollah plays that crucial role of preventing a strike on Iran's nuclear installations. But if the Israeli mentality is, in order to finish the Gaza war and to bring back all the displaced people into the north, and Hezbollah is trying to stop that, and Hezbollah is not abiding by UN Resolution 1701, and the Lebanese state and the international community has not been able to enforce that, well, then something's got to give, and the chance of a conflict is actually looking more likely in 2024 as growing, not less. So despite Hezbollah slowly, very gradually escalating, I think Israel is looking at this situation, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, and I'm curious if you think the Israelis are looking at it the same way. I think they are, but that this is a matter of when, not if.
I
The
totally
conflict
agree.
is going to pivot from the south to the north.
Exactly. I spoke with some of my Israeli friends, and we talked about the possibility of a major war between Hezbollah and Israel. And what I heard was really interesting. Almost all of them said that, look, sooner or later we have to take care of Hezbollah. Otherwise, we have to live under the constant fear of Hezbollah forever. And I think they are right. Look, it happened with Hamas. From a certain time, I think it was after the Hamas attack in 2021, there was this notion in Israel that they can live with Hamas until October 7th, that major attack happened. Now I can see the paradigm shift in Israel, that if they continue living under the fear of Hezbollah, something like 2006 Hezbollah attack or October 7th Hamas attack may happen. And I believe after Israel is done with Hamas, Israel probably would think about initiating a surprise attack against Hezbollah. But to think that Hezbollah would initiate a war against Israel, something like what happened in 2006 or the October 7 Hamas attack, I think it's a sort of impossible, not only because Hezbollah is acting as a deterrence against a potential attack against Iran's nuclear program, but also I can see the difference between Hezbollah and other proxies like Houthis, for example, which we are going to talk about. One difference is that unlike Houthis, Hezbollah is, has restrictions. It does not have freedom of movement. It's controlled by the central government, right? Something that Houthis, do not have. They are not controlled. Basically, they are the government. Of course, they are not internationally recognized government, but the government in Sana'a is extremely weak, and it's fighting for its existence. It does not have the power to control Houthis. But in Lebanon, the story is totally different. The story with other Shia militia is also different. For example, in Iraq, they are under the control of the Iraqi government. Not totally controlled, but there is a restriction that they cannot do whatever they want. So that's another thing that I guess Hezbollah would not be interested in getting into a major conflict. But after Israel is done with Hamas, probably we should expect a sort of major conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. So with that being, yeah, please.
Small footnote to that is I see the restriction in Lebanon, but I don't see it coming from the central government, which has really failed to prevent this. I think I see the restriction coming from Hezbollah preemptively sensing the fear of losing their very robust social base and position. Meaning, why would I lose my supporters? Why would I risk losing my fighters? Why would I risk? It's like a golden cage. They can sell the cage, but then they would have no home. If they don't have Lebanon as a base, then they lose their meaning as Lebanese Hezbollah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think in this sense, they have the most contrast between local actor agency and proxy of the Islamic Republic.
That's actually a good point. Another point which I just recalled is that unlike Houthis, again, let's talk about Houthis. Unlike Houthis, which are, economically sort of independent, Hezbollah is not independent. They are sort of dependent on the government. Of course, they are also dependent on the Islamic Republic, but let's not forget that Islamic Republic is now facing economic problem. And that's another restriction for them. Not to mention that in 2006, after the war broke out and Israel destroyed south of Lebanon, they had a hard time to rebuild the country. And also the Islamic Republic had a hard time to economically, to help them to prevent to rebuild the south of Lebanon. We see the problem. The economic problem is worsening nowadays, right? So that's probably another big obstacle for Hezbollah and also to the Islamic Republic to initiate a major conflict with Israel.
And then the interesting thing with these terrorist groups that I think run states or live as a state within a state is I would say that, again, they innovate. So, we saw this like in 2005-06 when the earliest of rounds of sanctions came across the UN and the US and later the EU. Hezbollah, it's not that it's self-funding, but it also has autonomous funding. It has remittances from, the diaspora, but it also has the robust Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere and in Europe, the narco trafficking and the illicit,
that's right,
business trade. So I think they realized even early in this conflict, pre and post 2006, that you cannot have just one funding source. Iran is still the biggest one. I would say competition for the second, I don't have the data on this, is the resources they can siphon away from the central government. So in some ways, I don't see the central government even here in terms of finances now. First question was, I think, political and social, and this one is economic and financial. I don't see the government as being able to restrict the flow of goods, but I see the state and the functioning of the government, which we both probably agree is functioning very poorly.
Absolutely.
In Lebanon. It's an almost failed state situation.
It is.
But that is something that the Hezbollah can pull away, make the central government weaker and siphon resources. And then the third thing is this illicit trade. So when one funding source goes down, they still have this balance. So it's because of, I think, these offsets terrorist groups unfortunately innovate, and we've seen them innovate very well.
That's
Even
true.
ISIS kinds have been able to innovate while fighting a 80 some odd member coalition.
That's totally true. So we both agree on the fact that it's really difficult for various reasons. It's really difficult for Hezbollah to initiate a major conflict with Israel. Now, let's move to Houthis, which, as I mentioned, it's somehow different with other proxy militias of the Islamic Republic, including Hezbollah, which we just discussed, and Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Houthis probably are a standout in this context. They are somehow different. As I mentioned, they are basically the government. And the central government, if the central government in Sana'a wants to fight Houthis, that fight actually would be for their existence rather than countering their aggression in the waters. And also they are economically sort of independent. So they have a different situation. Not to mention that Houthis' aggression is also different because it disrupts global trade, unlike other proxies, which when they fight, they basically fight Israel or the U.S. bases and U.S. forces in the region, right? But Houthis now fighting the whole world. And whether we like it or not, they have been sort of effective in that fight, right? So I would like to know what is the best strategy to counter Houthis? Again, we know that Houthis, they are more resistant to airstrikes. Over 5 years, the Saudis coalition, the United States was also part of them. They started a bombing campaign against Houthis, and now that's the result. They are even stronger. I don't mean to say that bombing campaign made them stronger. That's not my intention. But the fact is that Houthis are now, controlling large part of the part of Yemen, and militarily they are stronger because the Islamic Republic provided them with weapons and training. It was in the news that Iranians actually trained 200 Houthi fighters were trained in one of the Iranian universities. I think it was Imam Hussein University, and they were also trained to fight naval fight and something like that. I don't recall the exact term that it was used in the report, but they are stronger, right? So what do you think is the best strategy to counter Houthis' aggression, Behnam?
I think it's a cocktail. I think it's going to have to be a combination. And the best strategy is going to be based on what is your goal, what is your timeline, and what is your risk tolerance? Because the Houthis, they inherited the rocket and missile forces of former Yemeni President Saleh. They drove the government after the Arab Spring into exile,
right?
And they're still in exile. So that they're not even the government; they're like a de facto government. They control most, but not all of Yemen. And they have the most, even though they're the newest proxy of Iran. They existed as a political force obviously before, but even though they're the newest proxy in Iran, or the latest member, we can say, of the axis of resistance, you look at the military capabilities they've gotten from the Islamic Republic, as well as the skills they already had. And you look at the fact that Yemen was always a war zone. It was the Arab world's poorest country. It was split in two during the Cold War. The country was awash in Russian and Soviet and Chinese and even North Korean weapons. And then you layer on the Iranian component on top of that, you get exactly the situation that you have today, which is, very volatile, very unstable. And they have very robust long-range strike capabilities. Make no mistake, the Houthis are the only proxy of Iran with medium-range ballistic missiles.
Exactly.
They're the only proxy of Iran with anti-ship ballistic missiles. Hezbollah has anti-ship cruise missiles. The Houthis have anti-ship cruise missiles. The Iraqi Shia militias and the Houthis also have land attack cruise missiles. That's a big difference. The drones that we saw Iran use in 2019 were used earlier by the Houthis first. So the Houthis is really the only the war-fighting theater in Yemen, where we saw missiles go from proxy to patron, meaning Iran developed a field model of a system and then brought it back into its arsenal. That's what the Houthis call the Burkhan 3 or the Zulfiqar. The Iranians call it the Rezvan. They paraded it in September 2022 in the Iran-Iraq war anniversary military parade. So the Houthis have a very unique relationship because they can contribute and they can innovate. So it depends a great deal on what is your goal. I find it a hard time to see the U.S. at this moment, or even really any Western country at this moment, being willing to commit to, politically disempowering the Houthis. I think a good goal is to defang them, to reduce the stockpile, is to signal resolve against them, is to cut the ties and the material and the economic support networks for money flows and money laundering that go to them, as well as the material flows that go to them. So we need more enforcement of the patrols, the multiple maritime security coalitions from the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, Indian Ocean, Gulf of Oman, Red Sea, Arabian Sea, Bab el-Mandeb. There are already multiple maritime security coalitions there that are international, that are designed to stop this Iran-Yemen trade. So you got to beef that up. That's number one. You have to detect this. Number two is you need the dynamic ISR, the dynamic intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance by the U.S. to monitor really all the coastline developments in Yemen, to see when and where the Houthis are taking missiles out of storage, and to do what we saw, in my view, was a very productive strike recently, which was firing at missiles that are being put on launchers or moved around on launchers. You're literally preempting something that's about to happen. And the way you do that is if you have very good intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So you have to beef up that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and also strike at the weapons that are not just in depots or storage, but that are really on the systems that are designed to launch them. Because if you cripple the launch systems, it doesn't matter how much capability you have left in storage. You can't fire them. So the trucks, the TELs, the rail launchers, this infrastructure has to go. And then more broadly, you want to be able to communicate to the international community that they will pay a price for threatening Red Sea shipping. Now, even as you militarily do that, you're going to have traffic rerouted. So it's not like when the US started using force, even for the first time with the UK, that all of a sudden ships felt safe in the Red Sea. No, they continue to either delay or go around the Cape of Good Hope. But you need to signal that there's a willingness to enforce this over time. And, something that's a little bit of good news is that there was an Iranian spy ship in the area, the Behshad. It actually replaced an older Iranian spy ship called the Saviz, operating in the Red Sea, that allegedly was helping the Houthis with targeting. That ship is no longer in the area. The next time such a ship comes anywhere near Yemen, it should be blown out of the water.
Exactly.
There's no reason why the IRGC should be permitted to have freedom of navigation in the Red Sea when international commercial vessels do not get to have freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. So there was this contradiction that existed. And lastly, and this is tough to say, but it is based on good news now that we have the Biden administration just this today, put the Houthis not on the foreign terrorist organizations list that they used to be on in 2021, because the Biden administration removed them, but they put them on this other terror list that's managed by the State Department, built off of an executive order. That's the specially designated global terrorist list, and it's still a sanction. It's still helpful, but we need enforcement of that sanction. We need to make sure that the money flows, the material flows are first politically identified, named, shamed, cut off, and you have to have a full court press against this group, and that includes its leadership, politically and militarily being willing to target them. And as long as you don't do that, the Houthi-Iran relationship is going to mature and evolve over time. And yes, they have some different views. It's not an ideological one-to-one like Lebanese Hezbollah. The Houthis are Fiver Shiites, they're Zaydis. But again, when you shoot in the same direction or you have the same overall goal, that develops an affinity. Meiji Japan and Nazi Germany did not look alike, but they had similar goals, and that builds a political affinity over time. Iran and Russia still had some conflicting day-to-day tactical issues, and to this day, the Russians never provided Iran air cover in Syria for all of their militia activity. But you look at how close Iran and Russia are today with the Ukraine conflict and the drone transfer. So unless you stop this, the Houthi-Iran relationship is only going to go like this and not like this.
That's true. That's true. Behnam, just one note. You said the the attack, the US and UK led attack on Houthis, it was recently, a few days ago. It was preemptive. But I heard that it was not as sort of preemptive as we define, because a few days before that, the Americans and the UK government said that if Houthis continue their aggression, they're going to bomb them. And Houthis were able to move their weapons and the other equipment to the safe place. So that's one thing. But the most important thing.
That's just on that. That's right. However, the preemptive strike was the most recent one, and that was a U.S. only one.
Yeah, it was just a few hours after the first attacks.
No, it was yesterday. It was the third U.S. attack.
Oh, really? I am not aware about that.
It was the third U.S. attack, and there was the one where they were putting stuff on launchers, and the U.S. targeted them.
Right.
But on the first two, I entirely agree with you. It's entirely unhelpful to say you will attack.
Exactly.
And to really leak the attack. And
right.
I think the only reason they did that is because obviously the administration did not want to attack.
Right.
So in this instance, what it was funny was what the US and the UK hoped would happen was that they hoped the reporting, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, CBC, whatever, reporting would do the heavy work of the deterrence. They think that the Houthis would be intimidated by the headlines.
And they were not intimidated because they, after
exactly.
the strike, again, they attacked. Not only they attacked an American ship, right? Yep. So obviously it did not work. And that attack by UK and US did not restore deterrence. So it was not a credible deterrence. So my understanding is that you just said that the United States announced that it designated Houthis in a list of terrorist groups, not FTO, but something else that you mentioned. This is a positive move. I welcome that decision, but to me, there are more steps that need to be taken. One is to redesignate Houthis as the foreign terror organization, and that's really important. Another effective move is to impose sanction on Houthis, because as mentioned earlier, they have their own source of income, and that makes them sort of different with other terror proxies like Hezbollah. And of course, you mentioned that Hezbollah also has its own source of income by smuggling and selling drugs and things. That's totally true. But imposing sanctions on Houthis is another effective move. And military strike, continuing military strike. I was recently thinking about, initiating a ground invasion. I know no country is willing to do that, including the United States. But look, let's not forget that Houthis have been under Saudi coalition bombing campaign for years, and it had nothing to do to them. It did not stop them. So probably bombing campaign would not prevent Houthis from their aggression in the waters. Maybe a ground invasion to retake Hodeidah port would be effective, but again, this is something that this is a step that nobody is willing to take. But I don't know if you noticed or not, I wrote an article published with Jerusalem Post, and I said, look, we know that Houthis are funded, they are trained, and they are equipped with military technology and missiles by the Islamic Republic. If you really want to restore deterrence and put an end to the Houthis' aggression, you have to deal with the Islamic Republic and its aggressive Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And to me, that's an important step that needs to be taken, because that's the only way that you can pressure the Islamic Republic to put the proxies, including Houthis, on leash. Not to mention that in 1987, when Reagan administration initiated the Operation Praying Mantis, it was after this operation that the American forces attacked the Iranian oil installation and some of the Revolutionary Guards vessels, that Ayatollah Khomeini announced the end of war with Iraq and said, I am drinking the chalice of poison. It was at that point that Iranians stopped their aggression. I believe a similar operation is needed to put an end to all of the Islamic Republic's aggression Otherwise, if you stop Hezbollah, another proxy would initiate another war. Houthis would initiate another war. It's just like, as you mentioned at the very beginning, it's an octopus, and you have to cut the head of octopus. So, sanctioning the Islamic Republic, unfortunately, from the time the Biden administration, President Biden came to the White House, sanctions were loosened. And we know that the Islamic Republic is selling oil, over 1 million barrel of oil to China and some other countries, and it has a source of income, right? And we know that money, part of it goes to funding terrorism. So that would be an effective move by the United States. But President Biden, I know this is too optimistic, but this would be an effective strategy to restore deterrence against the Islamic Republic, to reimpose tougher sanctions, something like the maximum pressure campaign that was initiated by President Donald Trump. What do you think about this?
I agree in principle. I just think in practice, I have some different views on implementation. Not touching the Yemen Houthi thing anymore, but focusing on this because I think we should dedicate some time to it. I didn't get to see the piece, but I'll go back and read it. But there are also a lot of voices calling for something similar, right? Go after the head of the snake, go after the eye of the octopus, go after the head of the octopus. There's a lot of analogies like this we can read online. Here's my view. It's a little controversial. If all of a sudden someone who you see traditionally does nothing starts doing something, even the something by the adversary is going to be treated as out of character, because the baseline psychological impression is that you do nothing or you do very little. So that's a sticky reputation, and you have to overcome this sticky reputation. So you need repetitive displays of force or repetitive displays. And I'm saying this because on the right and the left, it was a joint issue in America. It was a bipartisan failure of foreign policy in America. That led to the Islamic Republic of Iran not being as afraid of America as it used to be. A month after the U.S. left Afghanistan, the head of the IRGC, General Salami, said the America of today is not the same America of 10, 20 years ago. And the cadres doing the fighting on behalf of Iran across the Middle East today is not the cadres. Yes, the political elites still have all their experiences from the Iran-Iraq war, but we're moving into potentially a new era where the rank and file and the service persons and the next generation of ideological zealots at the helm of that state, their impression of America is very different. Their impression of America is defeat after its longest war in Afghanistan with pictures that we all saw. Their impression of America is failing to win in Iraq and a political crisis ensuing there and an opportunity arrived for the Islamic Republic. Their impression of America is Obama saying Assad must go, and over a decade later, Assad is still there thanks to Iran and Russia and Hezbollah.
Exactly.
And of course, the botched political relationship between America and its partners and its allies, like the UAE, like Bahrain, like Saudi Arabia, like Israel, perhaps the most high profile politically of them being Israel and Saudi Arabia, and the different partisan politics in America that impacts the political and the security and the military relationship America has with its longstanding partners like Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iran has noticed all of these things. So even when the US does something out of character, something that we could never have perhaps even imagined, like killing Soleimani, the Iranians still respond with force. The issue the American right and the proponents of pressure here have to really deal with is that when you pressure Iran, Iran responds with pressure of its own because you are threatening a vital interest of the Islamic Republic. So the way you respond to their pressure is the most important thing. You can't have the chain, the causal chain, be kill Soleimani, get hit with 16 missiles, you do nothing, which is exactly what happened.
That's right.
You need to be willing to go up that curve. And if you are fundamentally unwilling to go up that curve, and this is tough to hear, then this is just a loaded gun in a shaky hand. And that is the worst of all worlds, where you poke the bear and then you run away, or you have no political strategy to follow on.
That's right.
And, it's great here in Washington that in Congress, there is a bipartisan China committee. There's more consensus in Congress than ever before about the role of China, about how to deal with China, about the economic things we need, about the new regulations we need, about the authorities we need, and even about the military deterrence we need in the Pacific Ocean against China and the importance of Taiwan and all of this. Look, Anthony Blinken even had to mention it when he was in Davos, half a world away, about the importance of the Taiwan election. But we have more disagreement and dissonance in Washington on Iran. Can you just imagine for a second if both sides of Congress agreed on a vision forward for Iran, how much more productive it would be? And I'm saying this not to, long-windedly disagree with you, because again, in principle, I agree with you. In practice, I see these as really hard things for the U.S. to get over in the short term, particularly as Joe Biden is looking to minimize the footprint in the region and minimize even the importance of a Middle Eastern conflict that is entirely began by, as you and I said, Iran and its proxies. And we have a multi-front Iran proxy war with very little American interest, just in a couple hotspots. So I think moving into an election year for Washington to go back to that campaign, or to even really do some of the hardline military restoration thing, is highly unlikely. I support it, but I also support it with this caveat, the sense that we did not lose our deterrence overnight, or our deterrence did not erode overnight, and it will not be rebuilt overnight. There is no one magic bullet. There is a lot of things that are helpful. Step number one, in my view, is do no harm. Do not add fuel to the fire, meaning do not give the Islamic Republic more access to money. The
Right.
10 billion, the 6 billion, these are all own goals. These are all mistakes.
I totally agree, Behnam. Please go ahead.
And that's like the foundation. Step number two is don't lose opportunities to stand with your values and your strategy at the same time. Supporting Israel, moral and strategic, that's easy. But also supporting the Iranian people every time they protest. There's no reason why for 1 year of post-Massa protests, you've only had a couple of sanctions. Administration says it's interested in multilateralism and diplomacy. Well, you should work with your multilateral partners like UK and EU and Canada and Australia to designate and prescribe and sanction the whole IRGC. This is the real diplomatic effort you can do to push back on the Islamic Republic, which they have not done. And the third, I agree with you 100%, is the oil sanctions. If you're Khamenei, and Biden's overall approach with you is to dangle the JCPOA reentry. We come back if you come back. We restrain if you restrain. And the JCPOA had 2.4 million barrels of oil per day estimate during the period when it was enforced. Why would you agree to that if you're Khamenei and you say that America is the great Satan? And without the JCPOA, Biden lets you sell about 2 million barrels of oil a day with no pressure.
Yeah. So they still have their revenue. And I totally agree that with the upcoming elections in the United States, the willingness in Washington to get into a major conflict with the Islamic Republic is just like, it's almost impossible. And the Iranians understand this. If you listen to the Islamic Republic's leaders, their analysts, their media, they understand that Washington is not willing to get into a major conflict. And probably it's for this reason that they recently they accelerated their nuclear program. And that's actually one point that I wanted to discuss with you. It was in the latest report that the International Atomic Energy Agency issued a report apparently to this was a confidential report to the member states that the Islamic Republic has accelerated its nuclear program. And I think it was the nuclear scientist, David Albright, who assessed that Iran now is able to produce one single nuclear bomb, and in few weeks it will be able to produce 5, and until 5 months it will be able to produce 12 nuclear warhead. And Iranians may try to exploit the current chaos in the Middle East and also the upcoming elections in the United States, and may try to break out with a nuclear weapon. Israel is also preoccupied with fighting terror groups, with fighting Hamas, and Hezbollah and Shia militia in Syria. So now the situation is ready for the Islamic Republic to take this action.
I'm very glad you mentioned this, but I'm also very cognizant of how much I've spoken, so I'll try to keep it brief. It is entirely plausible and indeed very possible that the Islamic Republic tries to distract the world from attention on the nuclear file. If you remember in the fall, before October 7, August, September, there was reporting that from the same IAEA that the rate of enrichment, the stockpile of uranium, including the 20 and 60%, was going up, but the rate of enrichment was going down. Now, the November, December data is that not only is the stockpile going up, but that even that slow downturn in the rate is now becoming an upturn.
Exactly.
And that is a test exactly of what you're saying. They're not going to go for a weapon tomorrow, but they're testing the international community, I think. How focused are you on this? Is this going to be a point of pressure? Can you unite the international community on this? Again, there was a board of governors meeting in November with the IEA. The US and the E3, France, Germany, the UK, did not push for a censure resolution, which would have been the least thing to do. This is just a diplomatic option.
Yeah.
And that is an unfortunate signal to the Islamic Republic that it should and indeed could press ahead. Do I think they'll weaponize in 2024? On balance, probably not. But I think they will certainly benefit from the distraction of the Middle East being defined by the Israel-Gaza war or the Israel-Hezbollah conflict and continue to escalate their nuclear program. And indeed, there's an article I'm working on, 7 things you missed since October 7, and the nuclear is one of them. And it's so funny because the nuclear issue had galvanized global attention, and then overnight it became put on the periphery.
Right, that's right. That's really concerning, Behnam. Honestly, of all of these things happening in the Middle East, which we discussed, Hamas October 7 attack and Israel's continuous fight against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah shelling and attacking Israel, the Shia militia in Iraq and Syria attacking U.S. forces, Houthis aggression in the waters, which is really important. It's not less important than Hamas and Hezbollah. To me, the most important one is the nuclear escalation of the Islamic Republic. And theoretically speaking, if Iranians eventually decide to build the bomb, and we know that this is just a matter of a political decision. Otherwise, technically speaking, they are able to build the bomb. If that decision is made, then we will witness a whole new situation, and the Islamic Republic will be more aggressive without fear of any retaliation from any country, from the United States, from Israel, or any European country. And that is, to me, that's the most concerning one among all of other things that is happening in the Middle East.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree.
And Behnam bin Taleblu is a senior fellow at Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, where he focuses on Iran, on Iranian security and political issues. And I am Farhad Rezaei, senior fellow at the Philos project in New York. Thank you very much, Behnam, and hope to see you again with another conversation on different issues.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, and hope to see you in better times as well.
Thank you very much, Behnam.